Let's get right to it, shall we? In this exercise, I'm going to walk through an edit of a nighttime cityscape, a fairly common subject for photographers. Most, if not all, of the techniques I'll show you can be applied to many other types of subject material, so it will be a good exercise to watch, even if you don't intend on processing nighttime cityscapes specifically. This is an image of downtown Tampa, Florida that I made last week. It's a single raw file from an automated sequence of 20 that the camera made while the lighting on the bridge in the scene was cycling through various color phases. The 20 raw files were automated in camera in order to be the source for a pixel shift compilation. You will get to see that later in the exercise. Take my word, it's a very interesting comparison. For now, I'm simply taking a single file from the sequence and processing it as a standalone image. For anyone that's inclined to know the technical details, this image was taken with a Fujifilm X-H2 camera using a 23mm f2 prime lens set at f10, ISO 250, and the shutter speed was 15 seconds. It is an autofocus lens, however I manually focused the lens, and that's because I did not want the autofocus system to possibly make any minute changes from shot to shot during the sequence. Minute changes in focus would result in a less accurate final result in the pixel shift image I created from the 20-shot sequence that this individual shot was pulled from. The first thing I'm going to do personally is convert the raw file using Capture One as recommended by Fujifilm. I'm not doing a Capture One tutorial, so I haven't touched any sliders or made any adjustments. For this exercise, all I'm doing is opening the raw file in Capture One and then exporting it as a TIFF so that the proper X-trans demosaicing takes place before I do any work at all to the image. I will take a minute here to touch on the reason that Capture One is recommended for demosaicing Fujifilm X-trans raw files. If you use another brand of camera with a Bayer type filter on the sensor, then you can ignore this little detour I'm about to take. Lightroom Classic is optimized for demosaicing Bayer type files and not X-trans type files. Lightroom Classic generates demosaicing artifacts in X-trans files that aren't actually there, and it makes your image file look grungy and noisy. Remember though, if you have a Bayer type sensor in your camera, i.e. not a Fujifilm X series camera, then this isn't really a concern for you. Lightroom Classic is optimized for Bayer type sensors, and the artificial artifacts are generated because Lightroom Classic is demosaicing an X-trans file using a Bayer algorithm to do it. Capture One demosaics X-trans files correctly and doesn't generate any artificial artifacts. Here's the same raw file, demosaiced, or converted if you will, in both Capture One and Lightroom Classic. The Capture One file is on the left and the Lightroom Classic file is on the right. No adjustments have been made to the file at this point in either program. This is a 400% blow-up so that you can see the details. As I mentioned earlier, this image was shot at ISO 250. Trust me, at higher ISO values, Lightroom Classic files get a lot worse because then you have actual noise that can exist in the file, intermingling with artificial artifacts that Lightroom Classic is creating. That ends up being a double whammy against the final image quality when you attempt to denoise and or sharpen it. So at this point, I have the file sent back to Lightroom Classic from Capture One with no adjustments having been made yet. If you're following along and you use a non-X-trans type camera, at this point you would have skipped the Capture One conversion and you would simply be at the point of opening your raw file in Lightroom Classic. I'll start with a white balance adjustment, and then I'll make a slight exposure boost and a relatively heavy shadow boost. I'm deliberately keeping the image brighter in the midtones and shadows and lower in contrast than I intend for the final result. Optimizing those characteristics will actually happen via some various techniques closer to the end of my workflow. I'm going to lower the white values to help a bit with the detail beneath the bridge, but especially at the top of the building in the center of the composition. Finally, I'll adjust the saturation slider in the HSL panel to dial back some of the color cast from the sodium vapor streetlights that are prominent in the scene. That's all I want to do as far as making global adjustments in Lightroom Classic. Next, I'm going to make some local adjustments using the brush tool in the masking panel. Large bright areas against the sky in a nighttime scene can cause a glow that you may want to tame. I'll start with some preliminary fixes in Lightroom Classic, and then later when I'm in Photoshop, I'll make some more tweaks where that's concerned. I'm going to use a brush from the masking panel to bring back detail in the bright roof of the building on the right side of the frame. I'll follow up with the eraser to clean the edges up. I'm going to come back now with another brush at lower intensity to tone down the signage on the building. Now I'm going to brush again on the top of the tall building in the center of the composition to tame the highlights there. Finally, I'm going to brush in the sky with a lower saturation, a lower white value, and a lower highlight value to help tame that glow around the rooftop. Now I'm finished with the file in Lightroom Classic, and I'm going to take it into Photoshop for the rest of the work that I want to do. You may have noticed that there are several commonly used sliders in Lightroom Classic that I didn't touch. This is really important. If there's one thing you take away from this exercise, remember this, and it's for all images, not just night photos. Wait until late in the game, so to speak, after you've done sensor spot removal, object removal, retouching, denoising, sharpening, used any effects filters, and done any color grading, before you hit the saturation, vibrance, contrast, texture, clarity, or dehaze sliders. If you plan on using an external denoise and/or sharpening plugin, then also make sure that the Lightroom Classic noise and sharpening sliders are zeroed out. Edge blending, pixel matching, and realism will be much better if it's done to your file while the image is still soft, instead of doing those things after denoising and sharpening the file. Retouches simply don't blend in as well on a clean, sharp file, and with respect to effects filters and color grading, you're at risk of producing obvious halos in your image if you do things in the wrong order. Now I have the image in Photoshop. The first thing I want to do is duplicate the background layer so that I have a different layer to actually do my work on. What I'm going to do from here is retouching. I'm going to use a combination of the patch tool and content aware fill to fix some things that I want to change in the water to start with. I've got a few sharp little rectangular objects here that look a little too sharp compared to the overall softness of the water, so I'm just going to take those out. This kind of sparkly area here I find kind of visually distracting, so I'm going to go ahead and take that out of there as well. Clean that up a little bit. That looks better. This little white spot in the water here catches my eye. Get rid of that. There we go. Same thing with this right here. I'm going to clean this up a little bit first. And then there's kind of a disturbance in the water here that breaks up these reflections. I don't like that either, so I'm going to do something about that. That's a little better. Clean that up and clean this up. That's looking a lot better. I've got these little lights over here shining through the trees. That's a bit of a visual distraction. I'm going to take care of that as well. I think that's it for the retouching that I want to do. So now I'm going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer. I want to deal with some of this excess blue that's going on in this sky glow around the building here. So I'm going to go ahead and target that area. Selects the blues. I'm going to turn down the saturation and turn down the lightness on that. Now you'll notice this is affecting the entire image, not just the area that I want to deal with. So at this point, I'm going to take the mask. I'm going to invert it so that it's black. Everything goes back to the way it was with all the blue in the image. So I'm going to go ahead and get a brush tool, switch it to white, and hit this whole area surrounding the top of that building to bring that adjustment that I made back into this local area right here. That helped. It's spread a little bit farther into the sky than I want, so I'm going to reverse that brush, make it black, do a little bit of refining on the mask. Now you can see before and after. I've taken some of that excess blue out of the sky around that, and I feel that's much better. I've got one more thing that I want to do to fix that. I'm going to make a pixel-based layer with the Stamp Visible command. That's Shift-Control-Alt-E on a PC, Shift-Command-Option-E on a Mac. And now that I've got that, I'm going to get my burn tool. Going to set it at a very low value. I've got 8% here. I'm going to go to the midtones, and I'm going to hit the area in the sky around there. That's toning it down nicely. Going to switch it over to highlights, get an even smaller brush going here, and kind of get right in around the edge of that. Now we'll turn that on and off, and you can see I've pretty much tamed that glow in the sky as much as I need to. Now I don't want to build up a crazy amount of layers for the purposes of this exercise. So while I might not normally do this, for now I'm going to go ahead and flatten this. Now at this point, I feel that the image is ready for noise reduction and sharpening. I'm going to do those as two separate steps. First thing I'm going to do is duplicate the background layer, and I'm going to run my denoise filter on this layer so I can fade it back if I want to. You can use any denoise option you want at this point in time, whatever plugin you prefer, or whatever filter you prefer, whatever sliders you prefer. I'm going to show you what I prefer at this point in time and what I'm using. That's the Topaz Denoise AI. I happen to like the low light model for night photography, so that's what I've got set here. Now I am going to go through and sharpen it in a separate process, so I'm going to lower the sharpening that's taking place here. I pretty much want to just deal with the noise at this point in time. You can zoom in. This helps. I'm going to look at this area right here, and I can see a little bit of fringing, and I know that if I increase this color noise reduction slider a little bit, that takes care of a little bit of that fringing in these high contrast sharp lines here. That's pretty much it. I'm happy with that, and in order to help the AI model improve, I'm going to pass that along and tell them that yes, I like that result. At this point, I'm ready to sharpen the image. Once again, I'm going to make a duplicate layer to work on here. And my tool of choice is Topaz Sharpen AI. Now you'll see when this comes up, there are a lot of models here. and it does pay to go through them all. I typically ignore the names because motion blur, out of focus, too soft, etc., even though that's the basic model that it's been created from, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be good for your image. This image, for instance, was on a tripod, very stable, doesn't have motion blur, but I've been through all these and looked at them, and I happen to know motion blur, very noisy, even though I've already dealt with the noise and there is no motion blur. This one gives me the results that I want to see compared to everything else. So you can zoom in and watch that. It's updating the model. And I've been through all of these. That's the one I like the most. Now, as I said, I've already taken care of the noise, so I don't want to do any more noise suppression here. So I'm actually going to zero that out on here. The other thing that I'm going to do is use this option, the auto subjects selection. You can watch right here what it's going to do. It's selected the buildings for me. This is great because that's really the only area that I want all this sharpening to take place. I don't want sharpening happening in the sky or in the water areas right now in this image. So this is actually going to save me a step in Photoshop of making a mask myself. With the exception of a few more tweaks, I'm close to being done with the image. For the sake of not building up a stack of layers in this exercise, I'll flatten the image again at this point. Now, I mentioned earlier that this individual file was one of a sequence that was intended to create a pixel shift image. If you own a camera that's capable of using pixel shift technology, then this type of scene is ideal for putting it into play. I did use Fujifilm's pixel shift feature to create an ultra high-res version of this scene, and I'll let you see a detail side by side to this single RAW file for comparison. In addition to the incredible difference in resolution and detail between the single RAW file and the pixel shift file, you will also notice a marked color difference. Color accuracy is an additional benefit of pixel shift technology. It's a discussion that's outside the scope of this exercise, but in a nutshell, pixel shift images don't require demosaicing and therefore have inherent true color accuracy. Now, anyone who lives in Tampa knows that this building in the center of the composition has a green exterior color, and even in the orange-yellow color of the ambient light from the sodium vapor lamps in the scene, the green color comes through, but in the single RAW file, color accuracy, especially after white balancing for the ambient light, isn't really there. The pixel shift image on the right of the screen is displayed at actual 1:1 resolution, no magnification at all. The single RAW file on the left that I've been working on has to be displayed at 2x magnification for a side-by-side comparison of the details. Look at the furnishings and the decor inside these offices. The detail in the pixel shift image is stunning in comparison to the RAW file. Like I said, if you have a camera that has pixel shift technology, definitely don't hesitate to take advantage of it when shooting this type of scene. Currently, I'm personally aware that Fujifilm, Sony, Pentax, Olympus, and Panasonic make camera models that can do this with some differing variables in the number of shots being combined, file resolution, etc. And some of the manufacturers have a different name that they call the feature in their cameras. At this point, all that's left to do is based on adjustment layers that I'll want to tweak in multiple iterations of the file later, so I'll use the camera raw filter right now to straighten up the buildings in order to avoid having to repeat this step multiple times on multiple files. You'll see what I'm getting at in just a minute. So what you're going to see now are the final tweaks for this image, where I create multiple iterations with different looks. The LED lighting on the bridge was cycling through a spectrum of colors as I was shooting, and if I want multiple images with some of the different color variations, I could reproduce all of these steps I've done so far on the various images that I shot, which would take a long time and be a total pain in the you-know-what. There is, however, a much more efficient option. At this point, I'm going to make a duplicate of this file and simply change the color of the LED lighting. This can be done in multiple iterations of colors, if I wanted to see multiple variations without the hassle of processing a bunch of files from scratch. You'll see how easy this is now. The first thing I'm going to do is make a color selection of the bridge and the colored light reflecting in the water. I'm going to open up a hue saturation adjustment layer. Now I'm going to go through some variations of color and see what I like. You can check this colorize box to get some variations in how things will look. I'm just playing around right now so that you can get an idea of the flexibility. I actually like this. Now, if you remember earlier, I mentioned that as I was doing all my other adjustments, I was leaving the color intensity and the contrast kind of flat in this image because it's at the very last stages here where I want to work on that and tweak it in the final variations. So the first thing I'm going to do here to bring some contrast and some color back into this image is I'm going to color grade it. I'm going to go ahead and go to the color lookup adjustment layer. And I'm going to choose the Fuji Reala 500D LUT here. Look at what a difference that makes. Now it's a little too strong, but I'm going to back it off to 0 and then bring it up to where I actually want to see it. That's looking nice. Overall, I think it's kind of cool looking in some areas and still needs to be warmed up, especially on the buildings, to bring back a little bit of that sodium vapor lighting ambiance. So I'm going to take the color balance adjustment layer here, and on the mid-tones, I'm going to add a little bit of warmth. And in the highlights, I'm going to add a little bit of warmth as well. But to contrast all that, I think I'm going to go in the shadows and see what it looks like if I actually add just a touch more blue to the shadows. Now we're building in some color contrast. That looks good. I think I'm going to look at these layers and see. This railing down here is a little bit warm for my taste, so I think I will go ahead and do a little bit of masking to kind of bring that back to where that started. That's looking a lot better. And at this point, I can always go back here and I can change what's going on with the LED lighting on the bridge. Now, if I wanted to at this point and just wanted to make some variations, I would do this. Go in the History tab, and this little button right here is going to make a duplicate document of exactly what you have on screen. So there, I've got a duplicate. So there's the original. On this one, I can go in, give myself another color look with the LED lighting on the bridge if I want. Again, go to the History tab, duplicate that, go back to layers. Now I could shift it up and get another color look for the bridge. And you can just continue this. Make a bunch of separate documents, all with the variations that you want, and save each one individually. That is a real time saver. Now the final variation that I want to see with this is going to be black and white. So I have another duplicate image of the last one that I made here. And on top of this, I'm going to give it a pixel-based layer. Once again, Shift-Control-Alt-E on a PC, Shift-Command-Option-E on a Mac. And now I've got something to work with. I'm going to use Nik Collection Silver Efex Pro 2 to do my black and white conversion. They happen to have a model in here that looks really good for nighttime cityscapes, and I like it a lot. It is the one called Wet Rocks. Really gives a nice look to it. I do a little bit of tweaking in here. I put the grain per pixel to the maximum to give it the finest amount of grain, not coarse grain. This would be something I'd want to print on glossy paper, maybe even metallic paper, and just want some really shiny, deep, glossy blacks. So I'd also probably tweak this curve just a little bit for some contrast there. And that's probably all I need to do with that. The last and final tweak that I would do to that is go here to selective color, and this is going to effectively let me work on just the bottom end of the curve to the middle of the curve by adjusting some sliders, and I'm going to leave the highlights alone. So I'm going to go here and hit the neutrals, which would basically be the middle of the curve, and I'm going to take the black slider and lower it. That's going to boost those midtones up somewhat in here. That's kind of where I like them to be. Now I'll go and select the blacks, and I'm going to give a little more punch to the black sky and the water. I'll let you see before and after on that. There's one more thing I need to do to this black and white version. I'm going to need to take the burn tool, get into the shadows, and take care of this glow that came back around that building. There we go. That's exactly what I want going on. That's going to make a beautiful print.